will participate in the meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing only to observe the live meeting and not make comments may do so on YouTube at youtube.com/mountainview.mountainviewgov, one word. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments online during the public comment period for an item by joining this webinar using the link https://mountainview.gov/meeting and entering webinar ID 890-7282-8513, or by phone by dialing area code 669-900-9128 and entering webinar ID 890-7282-8513. Any emails received by 4:30 p.m. today were forwarded to the PSAB. Emails received after 4:30 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. Okay, with that, we're going to move to item 2, roll call. Ms. Ramberg, could you take a roll, please?
Yes. Chair Ayer?
Present.
Vice Chair Frink?
Present.
Member Brodowski?
Present.
Member Langton has let us know he will be absent. Member Sandu has let us know he will be absent. Member Tang?
Present.
Member Wang?
Present.
Thank you. Item 3 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the advisory board on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes, which I will confirm in a moment, depends on how many people are wanting to speak, during the section. State law prohibits the PSAB from acting on non-agendized items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on today's agenda? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. I'm going to do a quick check. It looks like we have one hand raised. Please go ahead and take 3 minutes. The name is Silicon Valley DSA. If you could also let us know what DSA is, some folks may not know, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, this is actually Tim McKenzie. I'm logged into from a previous Zoom, so it's actually Tim McKenzie just speaking for myself. Sorry for the confusion. I thought I had logged out and was with my regular Zoom. I won't need the full 3 minutes. I'll just take a pause for a moment right now. I wanted to pause, given that this is the Public Safety Advisory Board. Last week, there was Andre Ratana was a 13-year-old who died while he was biking to school. And that is a huge issue of public safety. It resonates deeply with me. I bike just about everywhere. It's sad, it's relevant to the board. I just wanted to bring that up, take a moment to remember him and to center what is most important of public safety, of us being able to exist and walk around and move around in our city. And just wanted to take a moment for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to just check if anyone else has raised their hand. It looks like that's it. So we will now close the oral communication item and move to discussion action items. So item number 4 is minutes approval. This is for the last meeting, which was on February 24th of this year. Does anyone have any comments or question about the meeting minutes? Don't think I see any. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Just being clear, do we have a quorum for that? Or is that allowed?
We have a quorum.
Okay, great. So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second to go approve the meeting minutes? Thank you, Joan. Ms. Ramberg, would you take a roll call vote to approve the meeting minutes?
Certainly will. Commissioner Wang,
Aye.
Commissioner Brodowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Tang,
Okay.
Sorry, having problems unmuting. Aye.
Vice Chair Frank,
Aye.
Chair Ayer.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you. We are moving on to agenda item 5, which are the discussion and action items for around a couple of topics. The first one, 5.1, is a presentation and discussion on the draft military equipment funding, acquisition and use policy to be recommended for council adoption in accordance with Assembly Bill 481. This item will be presented by Megan Maravich, Assistant City Attorney and Police Chief Chris Chung. So I'll let you two take it off. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Megan Maravich, and I'm beginning to share the presentation now. Can you see?
Yes,
Excellent.
thank you.
The purpose of this item tonight is to provide background and information regarding Assembly Bill 481. We'll also present to you the Mountain View Police Department's draft policy 709 on military equipment funding, acquisition, and use. The complete draft policy is in the agenda packet for this meeting. At the end of the presentation, will also be available for question and answer and other discussion. To provide context on AB 481, in September of last year, the state legislature passed and Governor Newsom approved 8 law enforcement reform bills. Those bills included the expansion of public access to law enforcement records, restricting use of certain equipment at protests, among others. AB 481 specifically intended to increase transparency into the funding and acquisition and use of military equipment by local police agencies. The bill makes cities and police agencies accountable for the equipment they have, requiring reporting on its use and compliance with standards and policies surrounding its use. AB 481 also requires the adoption of procedures by which members of the public may register complaints or concerns regarding the use of military equipment. And it incorporates a community engagement component that allows for public input. Specifically, AB 481 requires the City Council approve a military equipment policy in order for the police department to continue its use of existing equipment. We've planned to take the draft policy before City Council on April 26th. The police department will publish an annual report documenting the equipment's usage, reporting on policy compliance, and including any community feedback that the department received throughout the year. Following publication of its annual report, the department will host a community engagement meeting. That first meeting will likely occur following publication of the first annual report in April or May of next year. Also, the policy must go before City Council for renewal annually. AB 481 defines military equipment by these 15 categories. These categories continue into the next slide as well. And a complete list of the categories is also included in the staff report. Of the 15 categories, Mountain View Police Department has items in 8 of the categories. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Chung, who will go into more detail on MVPD's inventory and the consideration for use of specific equipment.
Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I see some nods, thank you. So I just wanted to give the commission a sense of the equipment that we have, how we use it, when we use it. It's important to understand, though, the vast majority of the equipment on this list is kept inside of Mountain View PD. It's not deployed out with our officers all the time. It's highly specific. In essence, we have a lot of these different tools for very specific incidents that might occur. The one exception to that is our patrol rifles, that if you were to look inside any police car, you would see between the driver's and passenger seat a rifle that's in a locked mount. That is a weapon like that gives us much greater accuracy at much greater distance if there's a deadly threat situation, such as an active shooter situation. We are very keen to have consistent and ongoing training with all of this type of equipment, especially as you'll see in a slide in a second. The more specified a piece of equipment is, in general, the fewer people at the police department are qualified and certified to use it, and the rules become even more stringent. For example, a sniper on the SWAT team, there's only 2 in our department who are qualified to use, carry, and deploy a sniper rifle. So it's not that any officer can just go and grab a sniper rifle. We consistently look at the threats that happen across the country, across the region, and just locally here, I think we all remember the Gilroy Garden Festival shooting, the VTA rail yard shooting. We've had active shooter incidents in the region, threats over at Great Mall. So just because we've been extremely fortunate here in Mountain View, and I'm knocking on wood on my desk, doesn't mean that, someday something bad might not happen, and that's our job to make sure that we're properly equipped and well trained to meet whatever that threat might be. And it's also important to understand there's a regional component too, where our neighboring jurisdictions all have very similar equipment, because in any of these large scale critical incidents, what you'll find is all the departments are responding to help whatever jurisdiction is in that time of need, and in the Bay Area. When this equipment is deployed, almost always leadership up through the chain of command is notified. And in fact, for the highly specialized equipment that you'll see, you will see basically a very explicit decision by the incident commander to say, yes, we can use it, or you can deploy it, and then an additional level of command authority to actually use it. And again, I think I mentioned it, most of this equipment is really specific as to who can take it out and check it out. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, these are the equipment categories that Megan mentioned. You saw that really long list of those. These are the ones that we have. So for instance, we have a drone program that was adopted and authorized by council in 2019 that we've used quite a few times in terms of looking for search and rescue, for putting above a house of a suspect, a murder suspect that we were going to go and arrest. It gives us a much more kind of better sense of what's going on. If the person decides to run, it's much safer for our officers to know and have a view from above. The command and control vehicle you might have seen at some of our downtown events. It's a giant RV that's painted black and white. That allows us to have a mobile office with television screens, internet connectivity, to basically have command and control of any sort of special event that we're working. We do have an explosive breach program, and with that, that allows us to basically put a hole in a wall in a manner when we know that there's no one in that room, if and when we had to go rescue someone. So the typical use case on something like that is a hostage rescue, where in many cases that we see, if someone's being held hostage, a very common occurrence is whoever's doing the suspect, they'll usually barricade all the doors, right? So in this instance, it gives us some options to get into a house and rescue someone in a very quick manner. Categories 8, 9, and 10, the patrol rifles, sniper rifles, and associated ammunition. Those are all the different, like I mentioned before, aside from the patrol rifles that are in our cars, our snipers do have rifles. And so we're looking at that. We're currently considering a program with the 50 caliber sniper program, but that's not active right now. We just have that in inventory, so we're disclosing that. And the last category are the less lethal munitions. This would be like tear gas, rubber batons, any sort of we call them diversionary devices. The public may know them as flashbangs. Again, use of those types of equipments is highly, highly specified. To give you a sense, in the past 20 plus years that I've been here, we have not deployed them in an active incident, the chemical weapons, this is the tear gas and such, diversionary devices we have. And just to give you a sense on how and when that's done, our SWAT team that uses it has to make sure that they know what they're seeing like inside a room when they deploy it. They cannot just blindly throw it into a room because we don't want that to land near anyone, especially if there was a child involved. So there's very strict guidelines around that. Again, this is kind of a broad overview of some of the things we have, and I'll turn it back over to Megan.
So how does AB 481 affect Mountain View? Well, if the council approves of the draft policy, then MVPD will continue to be able to use their existing equipment that falls within those categories defined on earlier slides. Additionally, the department will comply with all of the annual reporting requirements described earlier in the presentation, and tracking the use and acquisition of all military equipment, and then publication of the annual report. Without approval by the city council, the bill sets out a timeline that allows for 180 days from publication of the policy for city council to adopt it. So if it's not adopted at the first meeting, there is a 180-day grace period for continued use while that policy is refined. But if the draft policy is not adopted within 180 days, the department would have to cease use of all military equipment. And then that would also require significant redesign of existing policies and operations that the department currently uses and that Chief Chung just described. Overall, if a policy is not adopted and we have to cease use of this equipment, it would significantly impact the department's ability to respond to critical incidences. Finally, we wanted to allow for an opportunity for question and answers and other discussion.
Okay, thank you. I want to open it up to any questions or comments from the board. Ava, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. This question could be for Chief Chung or Captain Canfield. I remember descriptions of like I know the department doesn't have a Bearcat itself, but it has used like one from a nearby department. Like, would this reporting include usages of like other departments' equipment as such, or is that like under like that department's what am I trying to ask? Does this cover like borrowing equipment from other departments?
So my understanding is, so every jurisdiction within the state of California has to do exactly what we're doing before their council. So the Bearcat you're thinking of is an asset that belongs to the city of Sunnyvale and is a mutual aid asset. So my understanding of the law, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, is they're reporting under theirs, and our responsibility is to make sure that anyone that comes to help with us, that those entities abide by this law. So in essence, if they're reporting it to their councils, then we're okay.
Right, and just to elaborate, there is a coordination with other jurisdictions that touches on mutual aid in the policy. That's section 709.6 for later reference.
Okay, thank you. Joan, you have your hand up?
I'm unmuted now. I have a number of questions, and I think most of them go to Chief Chris. I need an explanation of rifles. I'm clueless about rifles. So you talk about a military rifle, a sniper rifle. I know that BB guns exist. I just don't know what the difference between all of these are. Could you give us in 5 words or less an explanation of those?
I'll try to do it in 20 words, if that's okay. So the handguns that you see that we carry are effective mostly within about 5 to 25 feet, maybe out to 25 yards. And this all depends on if you're running and such. And a lot of what the public, I think, understands about guns and rifles is largely influenced by Hollywood, which we find a lot of times trying to dispel that. So handguns, think of that as an effective range of 5 to 20-ish feet.
How big is a handgun?
About this big. It's the
Okay.
pistols that you see, right?
Right.
A rifle has a longer barrel and generally has an optic system, something you can look through that sometimes will magnify it. So the distance goes from anywhere from 0 out to 100 feet, right? So the accuracy is much better. You've heard the term probably shotgun, right? A shotgun actually doesn't shoot. It can shoot one bullet, but in the mid 90s when I got hired, one shotgun shell would shoot 8 tiny bullets, but it would also spread. And that's the reason why police departments in the mid 90s went away from shotguns and went to rifles, because one bullet with the scope and a longer barrel was much more effective. And every police department will tell you, we are responsible for every single bullet and everywhere it goes, even if we miss who we're firing at. So when you hear these terms of like the caliber, that just means the size of the bullet. So I don't want to overcomplicate it, but does that kind of give you a sense of what you're asking?
Yes, but what makes a sniper rifle different?
The sniper rifle's bullet is actually even larger and more precise, and because of the scope that's on top, you're really accurate almost out to 100 to 150 yards, right? So, and the use is much more surgical in a sense. So when a sniper is used on an operation, their primary duty is to report back to the command post and say, this is what I see, right? And when a sniper would actually pull the trigger is very specific. Sometimes it's when they see through their perspective that a life is about to be in threat. If the suspect is pointing a gun and looks like they're about to shoot somebody, that's when they have the authority to pull the trigger. Sometimes they'll use the snipers to break glass of, let's like a bank window. Bank windows are a lot thicker than a regular window. So it's not that, if we needed to get through that, it helps if the sniper takes a shot or two at the bank window to initially break it, and then the team breaks it and goes in, right? These are some of the different ways that a sniper rifle can be used. Because you could shoot a pistol at a bank window and there's a possibility that it doesn't go through. And that's just an example of the size of bullet also determines how effective it can be.
That's helpful, thank you. One more question. Will a bullet with a rifle be heavier than a bullet in a pistol? Is that the point?
Generally, yes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joan. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. Jeanette, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, I guess, what are some, because I know they have the rifles in their vehicles. So I guess what are some of the common or recent, I guess, uses of the rifles instead of just the handgun?
To my knowledge, we have not had to actually use them. They've been taken out, and typically where you'll see them taken out is if we pull over a car that we know the people inside, we believe they have weapons, right? So one option is we use our handguns. The other option is to pull the rifle out, and this goes back to the accuracy. So if we think there's a threat, it's actually preferred to have the rifle out because you have a scope and a sighting system that allows us to be much more precise, right? But it's all situational. If we are responding to an active shooter, that is absolutely a time to have that rifle, because most active shooter situations we see across the country, the suspect is armed with something equivalent to a rifle or even higher caliber that shoots more bullets faster. So hypothetically speaking, if we were to run towards a suspect who is using a rifle, the odds are that suspect would be able to hit us way sooner if we were only using a pistol. So that's why the preference is to grab a rifle and be able to stay farther away from a threat, maybe around, behind cover, and still be able to engage and rescue people if needed.
Thank you.
Joan, is your hand up again?
Yes.
Okay, good.
But I'll get in line if there are other people.
No, not at this time. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I have two more questions. One of them is I'd like to know how an explosive breach works. And then the second question I have is there equipment, is there military equipment that would fall in the category of 481 that Mountain View Police would like to have but doesn't yet?
Okay.
Yeah, two questions.
Got it. So the explosive breach, it's not what it is not is what you see in the movies. A lot of times, either the sticks of dynamite or C4. It looks like Play-Doh or something. That's not what we use. We use something called det cord, and it's really just looks like if you're familiar with like a cable TV line that goes from the wall to the TV. I think I'm dating myself because no one uses cable anymore. But if you were to have a spool of that, the length of that cord is very mathematical because there's explosive inside that cord. So the training a breacher goes to basically is to calculate what's the material I'm trying to get through and calculate how much cord do I need, and then wrap it in a way, let's say you want to make a hole that will fit a 6-foot officer, right? So they do all these calculations, and then they form it and they make it in that shape, and they stick it to the wall, and then they basically stick what's called a blasting cap into the cord, and basically they're ready to go, right? And everyone kind of just waits, and at that point it's a waiting game, because that doesn't mean that we get to use it. It just means that the option is set up to use. And for that to actually get to use, you have to have a scenario where we would have ongoing negotiations with the suspect, and we will wait forever and talk forever as long as we know we're talking. But if there's information going to the tactical commander that the person is unstable, they're starting to lose their cool, they're running towards the hostages with a gun in an aggressive manner, then immediately it's a go, 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 right? So they hit the explosive, it blows a hole in the wall, and the team rushes in. So that's kind of the typical use case that you would see that. And the officer, I think there's only one is allowed to do this, has to go and get certified through the state. It's a highly, highly controlled kind of skill, if you will. And you can imagine why, because we're dealing with explosives.
Yeah, thank you. And then what's your Santa Claus list?
Actually, we're very content. A lot of the tools that you see listed here were on our list over the years and decades, and we're fortunate to have them in our toolbox. Really, right now, I don't know. I can't think of anything else on that list that we currently need. If we do in the future, we would just follow the 481 guidelines and go before council and say, here's what we would like to do and use.
Okay, thank you.
I had one quick question. I think I saw on one of Ms. Maravich's slides that there would be an annual community engagement when the renewal came up. I'm not sure if I understood that correctly.
Yes, that's right. So the bill built in this community engagement meeting function. And so each year, after the annual report is published and before it goes before council, there will be a community meeting to allow for input and review of the report.
Okay. And was there any community input or will any community input besides this meeting happen before the list goes to council in April?
This is the only community meeting in addition to the opportunity for public comment at the publicly noticed meeting where council will consider the policy.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other questions or clarifications from the board at this time? Don't think I see anyone's hand up, so I'm going to move to see if there's any public comment. It looks like we have 2 people that have comments. You can have 3 minutes each, and we'll start with Bruce England. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 comments. One, I guess, is a question. On page 8 of the report, it was a very good report, by the way. I thought it was very informative. The section on sniper rifles on page 8, there's a line in there about last time that they were deployed was 2017 to provide observation of a subject known to carry assault weapons. It's unclear to me why it would be used in a case like that. So I'm just curious. And then the other two are comments. One is on the same page on the training for some of the tools. It says that in post, vendor provided trainings would be provided. And I don't know, just my experience with vendor provided training is usually the vendors like to talk about the cool things the tool can do, not how you might not use the tool. And I'm sure that the chief knows that sometimes it's just as important to know not to use the tool as it is to use it. So I hope that other training besides vendor provided would be entertained. And then lastly, going back to Chair Ayer's point about the updates, I'm hoping, I think it's great that will go to City Council, but it would also be great if the annual updates would go to PSAB as well, as it is tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more public comment. Tim McKenzie, please go ahead.
Hi all. This might be the place where the drumbeat that I always hit. The police are armed agents of the state that have a very narrow role. This is a place where we're talking a little bit about that. But honestly, I do not think militarization of the police, I think, has gone too far. That Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, yesterday called on people of the world to come out today in support of peace, in support of Ukraine. That is a situation where the military is needed, where there is some of these more high-powered and very expensive things are justified and relevant. For a municipal police department where major issues seem to be traffic safety or the mental health of our residents, I think there are many other issues and places to better look towards things. I think the excessive militarization is a bit much. I'm concerned. And also just a point of one of the categories, less lethal is kind of a meaningless term. Things are lethal or they are not. If someone dies, they're not going to care that it was a less lethal thing. It's kind of a binary. So I think that it's a bit troubling having all this excessive militarization. I think that there is too much for it. And when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And, there are a lot other problems that could be solved by things other than weapons and military weapons for a municipal police force.
Thank you. Let me just confirm one more time, there are no more questions from the public at this time. Are there any more questions or comments or clarifications? Cleve, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment about the last commenters' comments. And that is to say, we live in this really nice world in Silicon Valley where crime is not that prevalent to us. But the reality is that the world at some point knocks on your door. So when I was a child, in my neighborhood, I lived in one such area where the world was really nice. But one day a man showed up with a very powerful gun and he killed several people. And the police officers at the time, because this was many years ago, didn't have the same tools that he had. And so many of them lost their lives trying to stop him while he was killing women, children, and other people at a grocery store. And these officers at the time still had revolvers. And one of them was literally loading his gun bullet by bullet, not even with a cassette, when the suspect came around a corner and killed him and murdered him. And so these are not tools that these officers run around with all day, every day. These are tools that are reserved for the most extreme circumstances. And the idea that we wouldn't have these tools when we need them is not really a good idea. So I'm from Florida. In Florida, we have hurricanes. almost everybody that I know has a generator. Nobody uses a generator until there's a hurricane. But if you don't have a generator, when the hurricane comes, you're in trouble. And these are those kinds of tools. And secondly, I just want to say that the idea of a non-lethal tool is a real thing. Things that are rubber don't typically kill people, except again in the most extreme circumstances. And we should understand that when we talk about these tools and not sort of demagogue them as these really crazy things that the cops want to use to, to hurt people. They're meant to save lives. They are meant to cause the least amount of damage when they're deployed, and they're deployed for the specific purpose of trying to save lives of innocent people while not hurting the person who's maybe doing the damage. Okay, I just wanted to say those things. Thanks.
Thanks, Cleve. Are there any other questions or comments from the board at this time on this topic? Okay, I don't see anything at this point. So thank you, Ms. Maravich. Thank you, Chief. And we will move on to the next agenda item, which is 5.2, the budget. This is very exciting. So this item, the Mountain View Police Department budget, is going to be presented by Audrey Rambert, who is our Assistant City Manager, and Chief Chung is up again. Take it away, you two.
Thank you, Chair. Looks like our presentation is started, and if you'll move to the overview slide, thank you. So the council, as you know, referred to the Public Safety Advisory Board a presentation on the police department's budget. They did that when they adopted all of the commission's work plans in September, and then Melvin updated you about that in October at your meeting. And then it was at your meeting last month that the question was raised as to whether the timing for that presentation and whether it might be possible to present it in March. And I'm pleased to say that we are able to do that. And that's why we're before you this evening. Given where this fits in the timeline, though, which I'll spend a little bit of time going over in a minute, what that means is the numbers that we're sharing with you tonight are from the fiscal year 2021-22 budget, which started in July 1st of 2021 and will conclude on June 30th of this year. And we are not anticipating any significant changes to the police department budget at this point, other than the things that are general cost drivers that aren't specific to the police department and aren't within the control of the police department and aren't as a result of any police department proposals. But should there be something that comes up between now and when the budget comes to the city council in June, I would be happy to come back and update the advisory board. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do now before I turn it over to Chris to talk in more detail about the police department's budget is to talk about the process and the contents of the budget in general. First off, with the roles, we have a finance and administrative services department that is responsible for all of the city's financial transactions, which includes the projections and analysis to build the budget, as well as to ensure compliance with the policies that oversee the development and use of the budget, and then on an ongoing basis, tracking revenues and expenditures, as well as making projections into the future for revenues and expenses. The departments are the ones obviously closest to the community in terms of providing direct service and being aware of emerging community needs, also being aware of regulatory changes or other things that the city needs to comply with. And so the departments put together budget proposals, which then are submitted for the consideration of the city manager. It's the city manager's job to put together a budget proposal that then goes to the city council for the city council's consideration and adoption. The city council also adopts, general fiscal priorities or policies, I meant to say, and then also sets priorities through its biannual goal setting process. So in June of this year, the council adopted a strategic roadmap with 7 priorities and a work plan of 41 projects. And we are just now in the first 6 or so months of that work plan. So those things get funded in the budget as well. So the timeline, it's one of those things where at any one time you can be building one budget, spending another, and reporting on the one that you just, for the year you just got out of. It's a never-ending cycle. And it does take several months, starting around November through January, where the departments are putting together their proposals and the finance administrative services are doing that analysis. Right now, the city manager is in the midst of completing meetings with each of the departments. She meets with each department at least once. And then through the course of March, April, and May, makes decisions about the things that will fit within the budget, within the city's fiscal resource constraints, to then recommend the budget to the city council. That happens, the council's consideration of the budget typically happens over the course of 2 meetings. This year, the first hearing is June 7th. Where the recommended budget will be brought forward, and then the council will take action on June 21st to adopt the budget. So there are a wide range of things that are considered in determining the budget that will be presented to the council in order to meet a range of community needs. I mean, we're like one of the most diverse kind of businesses you can imagine. I mean, most businesses don't have a range of products or services as diverse as a city, with everything from public safety, like we're talking about tonight, to library services, to the maintenance of our curbs and our gutters. And so being able to meet that range of community needs, to maintain our infrastructure, and also to make sure that we have adequate funding for long-term liabilities, all of that goes into what the budget is and project it out into the future to make sure it's fiscally sustainable. And there are a lot of policies in place to guide that. And the budget document has a compilation of those policies. It's called Policy A11, Financial and Budgetary Policy. And if you are looking at the budget online or have a paper copy of it, that's the end of Section 7, which delineates all of those policies. And the thing that I would say, and I know this, I've worked for a number of cities in the peninsula, and many, many years before working for Mountain View, knew of its reputation as being a fiscally very well-run city. And as a city, we've been really well served by taking the long-term strategic approach to finances, which means making multiple year projections. And it meant many, many years ago, making the decision to own property that is leased and therefore provides an ongoing stream of rental income. We've also been well served by being fiscally conservative. And an example of that would be that when there are revenues that are one-time in nature that we don't expect to be ongoing, we don't use them to fund ongoing things. We reserve them for limited period positions that only are funded for a year, or other kinds of one-time expenses. And then the other thing I'll say about the drivers is that starting last year, as part of the city's Race, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan, we began applying an equity lens to the budget, of considering each and every change to the budget in terms of what impact, positive or negative, it might have on people of color and low-income communities. Next slide, please. So the contents of the budget, it's over 600 pages. It's hefty. I'd hold it up and show you, but with my background screen, I know it would be invisible. And if you would be excused for not feeling like you could get through all 600 pages. So I would direct you to the first section, which is the transmittal letter. It is the part of the budget that summarizes the rest of the budget's contents and kind of tells the story, if you will, about the city's fiscal position, about the city's goals and accomplishments, and then also about the major changes that are proposed in the budget. I think major is defined for what we call out on the budget as anything over 5,000. So that's a pretty fine-tuned opportunity to see the level of changes that are made in a budget. And the bulk of the budget really is the department section, which is section 3, where all 12 of the city's departments have their own budget tab. And that would include not only big picture information like their organization structure and their mission, but also for each division within the department, it would include the number of employees and a summary of the revenues and expenditures, and then any major changes within that department's budget. And then those are the things that are kind of rolled up and reported in one place in the transmittal letter. Also in the budget is the forecast. As I mentioned, the city does do a multi-year forecast each year, and we don't have a crystal ball. And so we do our best to anticipate what's going to be happening in the economy and happening with the different revenues and different expense drivers for the city. And the forecast does focus on the general fund. The city has many different kinds of funds. The general fund is the one that's the biggest percentage of the city's revenues and expenditures. And those are the things that are kind of the general revenues and general services compared to things like utility services. We do have a water, wastewater, and garbage utility that charges fees specific for those services, and therefore those revenues aren't spent on anything else. And those services aren't paid for by the general revenues. So that's just an example of some of the different funds. And so anybody who wants more information about funds, there's a whole section in the budget about what the different funds are and what the balances in those funds are and what they're used for. And I think that's an important thing to take a look at some point, because housing, for example, obviously a huge priority for the city and one of the city's council's strategic priorities now, going on, I think, the 7th or 9th year of the different goal setting processes. There is a housing fund that is separate from the general fund. There is a CSFRA fund, and there's also the CDBG fund, all of which fund housing construction or housing services or the staff associated with those things. And those you won't see in the general fund. So when you look at, when we're going to go to a pie chart in a minute that shows the general fund services and how the police department compares to that, that doesn't include all those other funds, which is like another 45% of the city's total budget are those other funds. The last thing I want to say on this slide is that we do try to make information about the budget accessible. It's not everybody's cup of tea and it can be pretty dry, but we have, current as well as historical budget documents on the website. We have a 4-page simplified budget that we call the financial view that we do each year. That's on the website. Last April, a little bit under a year ago, we did a Budget 101 workshop for the public, and the video for and slides for that are also on the website. And then Open Budget is a platform, I believe it's a Bay Area company that enables cities to put their budget, make their budget available to the public in a way that allows people to kind of play around and to dig deep and to sort things and filter things, looking at different funds or different departments or different categories or different time periods. So if next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there was a pie chart coming, and here it is. The city's police department budget is 29.4% of the total $154.6 million general fund budget. And then going around the pie, that's the big blue. And I don't know if that was coincidental, but it is the blue pie wedge. And then following around to the left is the fire department. So that's the safety. Those are the 24/7 hour operations of the city. And as in most cities, that makes up the largest part of our budget, and nearly to 50%. Following around, it's the library, then community services, Then Public Works, there's the small portion there of community development. And again, remember that housing funding is not in the general fund. And then administrative services is that lavender pie piece that includes information technology, finance administrative services, human resources, so all the HR functions, the city manager's office, the city attorney's office, and the city clerk's office. And then that last little yellow portion there, are we self-insure for our liability and have transfers to different funds for equipment replacement or other kinds of things. And that's what that piece of the pie is. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do is to put the city's police department budget into a little bit of context for the changes in the city's budget and population overall and the city's headcount overall over a 10-year period up till this current fiscal year. The population has changed in Mountain View, grown by a little over 11%. And that's roughly the same, I think coincidentally, for the city's total FTEs. FTE means full-time equivalent employee. So sometimes you have half-time employees or three-quarter-time employees. And so it'd be more bodies than that, but that's the number of full-time equivalents. And when I say it's coincidental, it's because there isn't a formula. It isn't like you need this many police officers or this many park maintenance people or other types of positions for each increment of residential population. But there's a lot more complexity to that, which we won't really get into. But it is interesting to note that while the total FTEs for the city went up pretty proportionate with the city's population, the employees in the police department went up just over 1%. So if you looked at kind of the number of residents or the number of FTEs per resident, I think I probably got that. Looks like I didn't put that in the right order, but there are more residents per FTE in the police department now than there were back 10 years ago. And then looking at the budget, the city's general operating fund, which probably should be 154 for the 21-22 year in accordance with what I just said on that pie chart. But that was an increase of almost 61% over the past 10 years, which you look at a compounded annual growth rate, that's about 4.8% per year growth. And the police department's budget in comparison grew about 4.4% per year for a total of 54% over that 10-year period. So my last slide, if you will advance me, thank you, Chris, is to try to put a little bit of context comparing Mountain View to other agencies. And I would also say that similar to how there isn't a formula for how many of any type of employee per resident, there isn't really a formula that says there should be some certain percentage of the general operating fund that a police department budget is. And that's because both what goes into a police department budget can vary widely across cities. And that's not just in terms of number of officers. It's also other things that kind of contracts that live in a police department budget in one city, but don't live in the police department budget in another city. And then what's the level of service that the community expects and what is the main thing that the police departments work on. And then also there's a range in how large the general operating fund is for a given city. So, Palo Alto has a considerably larger general operating fund. And they're not that much larger than Mountain View as a city, but they have more revenue for the reasons that are particular to Palo Alto. And they use that revenue in ways that are particular to Palo Alto. For example, they have a zoo. And they have a museum, and they have other things that aren't as typically part of a city. But then if you look at the other end of the range with Los Altos at 44% of their general operating fund, sometimes smaller cities that don't have as robust a commercial community and aren't as large, don't have as much of a range and depth of services. And so the police department budget in such situations is a larger percent. of their general operating fund. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation and turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Audrey. Good evening again. So I just want to provide context on kind of how our budget looks. Kind of the budget 101 of the police department is there's two basic buckets. One bucket is personnel costs, and these are salaries, overtime, benefits. And the other bucket is capital outlay purchases, equipment, paper clips, pencils, etc. So as you can see, the orange on the pie chart, and this holds true for most police departments, is that people cost the lion's share of any budget. And when you look at how our police department is divided up, the orange on the left that you see, the yellowish orange, that's our patrol division. So when you see field operations, that's typically the officers you see in uniform driving around. And I'll explain a little bit more. I have the next slide coming up that has actually an org chart that will make this a little more clear. And we also have, the special operations. This would be your detectives. And so while patrol officers will take any kind of case at the front end, it's the detective division that follows up. So if someone breaks into your car, a uniformed officer might take the report, but it's a detective who then picks up that case and tries to connect the dots to arrest the suspect. The small little blue silver is our administrative staff. There's 5 FTE positions there. And a lot of times what we don't, the unsung heroes of our police department is our support services. These are our dispatchers, our records, our community service officers who really support the work of the sworn officer ranks. So many times when we think police department, we think about officers in uniforms. But many times what's not understood is there's a huge network that helps make the business of policing kind of continue. As you look at our organization chart here, again, the left side there, the kind of slightly green shaded, that is our patrol operations division. So what I kind of want to call out, especially on this slide, is service delivery. So we in Mountain View consider ourselves a full service police department. And what does that mean? That means by and large, when you call to report a crime, a dispatcher picks up the phone in a very short amount of time, that an officer can get dispatched to you in a reasonable amount of time, and that once your case is taken, that a property crime like an auto burglary will be followed up on. There are some other cities in the Bay Area where that's not the model, where if you have your car gets broken into, it gets documented, but there's no follow-up because the positions aren't there for perhaps the detective division. And to give you a sense, because we are a 24/7 operation, it's not so easy as to say, well, if you just took one officer away here, we actually have right now 7 patrol teams. So if you imagine this is 24/7, Monday through Thursday, we have 4 patrol teams. There's a morning, like we call it early day shift. There's a late day shift that comes in around 10, a swing shift that comes in the afternoon, and then a graveyard, and they work 10-hour shifts. So we try to time it in the most efficient ways when we look at when's the highest level of call for service. And each team that you see there, team 1, team 2, team 3, consists of roughly between 4 to 6 officers. So what we try to do is put the most officers in the most overlap during the busiest times of the day. A little bit more toward the middle there, you'll see the column where you see weekend patrol teams. Our weekend teams work 3 days a week, 12.5-hour days, but we overlap them in such a way as you all probably know anecdotally, when's the busiest time in Mountain View? Friday and Saturday nights, right? So that's when we put the most overlap of officers, the most police cars driving around. And to put it in context too, is whenever there's a call for service, we typically like to send 2 officers. So that's 2 police cars. So if you have a team that's running by themselves and there's 4 to 6 officers, really you have capacity at any certain point to go to handle 2 calls, 2 to 3 major calls, right? And you're probably asking, well, what do you do if it gets even bigger than that? This is where we have the buffers built in, right? We have our traffic team. These are the officers on the motorcycles that their primary duty is accident investigation and traffic safety. But if needed, they can be called in to be that second officer. We have detectives that can come out of the office and assist our patrol division if needed. And we also have a great working relationship with our neighbors, Sunnyvale, Los Altos, Palo Alto. We go into their city all the time to help them. They come into our city as well to flex. And this allows each city to run a lot more leaner than, say, having to have 10 officers on at all the time, just in case. So we do try to use our resources as fiscally responsible as possible. On the far right side, we also have a mirrored kind of 24/7 operations, because our 911 dispatch center is a 24/7. So they kind of mirror that need, is to overlap at the most important times. So that kind of gives you a sense of our service deliveries. The one in the middle, you can see that not only do we have special detective units that investigate property crimes, we investigate person crimes. One thing that philosophically this department has always been involved in is county and federal task forces. And it's always been the belief here that we are a medium-sized agencies, and we're very thankful that crime-wise, we don't get a lot of action, right? But by sending officers off to task forces, this would be an example of the Auto Theft Task Force for Santa Clara County, the Computer Crimes Task Force for Santa Clara County, the FBI has had a Safe Streets Task Force. We allow our staff to get major city experience and learn from other agencies, bring back the best of what they have to offer and bring that experience back with them here. And it's also a force multiplier. If we were to get some major, like in the past, we've had major homicide investigations, we can then tap our partners who are on the drug task force or the auto theft task force for extra detectives who can come help us do surveillance to catch the bad guy. So there's a lot of flex in the system built in. Apologies for not switching to this slide a little sooner. I covered a couple of these points here, but I will also call out that the way we have it set up now is we do have a lot of extra units that allow us to provide the highest level of service to our community. An example of that would be our cyber forensics unit. It allows, I think we all know in this day and age, a lot of evidence at crime scenes and suspects is on their phones or in their computers or in their transactions online. And that allows us to quickly solve crimes or find missing people, find at-risk people, really kind of drill down and do really solid investigations. And I'm super proud of the detectives that work in that. There's 2 detectives that are in there full-time with the supervisor. We also have a threat assessment team that we've stood up. Now, this was created without adding any new positions or FTEs. This is actually a collateral assignment that we send our officers to because, believe it or not, in Mountain View, we have a lot of high-profile people, dignitaries, threats. We have a lot of companies here that receive a lot of threats. Having had someone make a threat against me and my family before, I saw it firsthand when the threat assessment team was activated to look into and basically give a very experienced and thorough examination of the level of threat that might be faced. And these are extremely valuable, these types of teams. Our Youth and Community Services Unit, you probably know them as a different name. This was a combination that we just made last year. This was actually the combination of our Neighborhood and Event Services team, which many of you know, Officer Janlea McPherson, who services our homeless community. And also, this was combined with our school resource officers. So this new unit, we've basically renamed it as the Youth and Community Services Unit. And I think you all know very well the work of our SROs that have done that as well. So I think I just wanted to highlight here that the values that drive our organization, these here, what you have in front of you is the City of Mountain View's values that we hold very high in esteem ourselves. Service is something that we look for in the heart of anyone that we hire, this kind of public servant's heart. If I could just go off script for just a second, if the people that we hire here, what we look for is just right here in front of you, right? Those with integrity, those that treat people with respect, those that serve others above themselves. And I look for people who do so without ego and do it in a way that they have a heart for the community and a heart for sacrifice. And it's a mantra here in our police department is excellence at every opportunity. And we look for those. We look for opportunities to just go a little bit above and beyond because we understand that every contact that we have, there's a lot of apprehension across the board. We don't know the background of the people that we come across, but we want to make the most of it. And we want to take any opportunity we have to just show a little bit more of ourselves. Not so much the stereotypical officer you might see on the news or Hollywood or on Netflix, but truly the character of the people that we hire. And that's my hope, and that's the standard that we hold here. And I'm super proud of how our folks do that. To give you an example of some of the things we spend money on the other bucket, the types of equipment that we have, something like the body camera system that all of the officers have. If you see this little square, actually, I'm wearing one here. I don't know if you can see it in the dark here, but a camera that records our interactions. Like anything, the equipment has a cost, as does the storage of video. So you can see there some of the price tag, the $61,000 annual contract that we pay to not only have the hardware, but also store video footage, right? Which can be quite large files. If you think of an officer who works 10 hours a day and maybe 2 to 4 hours of footage per officer per day, and that footage we have to hold on to for certain amounts per the state record keeping laws. If it's like a use of force, we keep it forever, right? So training is another aspect, and I'll go into more training on the next slide, but we do, with as many officers as we have to make sure that they're properly trained, ongoing. Laws are constantly changing, being updated, so we need to stay abreast of all the different case law changes. And like any business, we have a lot of software. We have a lot of databases. We have, these all come with maintenance fees and support fees. And so an example of this would be the databases that we tap into to access criminal records, right? And that's something every police department has, but that costs money. There's a usage fee to that on how many queries we make. Similarly, the crime lab in the county charges us for sending things to the crime lab. So the bill that you see there, the $116,000, is the balance of all the different things we send to the crime lab for fingerprints, for DUIs, for blood alcohol draws, for DNA processing. Uniforms and equipment. This is everything that we wear. A lot of the items that we brought up in the prior presentation, and even like the rental fees to go to local gun ranges to practice shooting, because we consider things like shooting and driving a perishable skill. So it's something we have to do often, 3 to 4 times a year, to maintain these skills, because we understand how high of a responsibility we have, especially as it relates to weapons, tools, use of force. Something that the community may not know is that, and it would be something like the crossing guards that we have at every single, well, not every single, but the schools that we do have them deployed at, those come out of the police department budget. Similarly, the animal control services contract that we have for the SAVACA, that's Silicon Valley Animal Control Authority, it's actually a contract that they come in and help us deal with any sort of animal issues, loose dogs running around or abandoned dogs. And that contract costs $479,000 to the city, but it comes out of the police department budget. And lastly, just kind of breaking down to give you a sense of the training. So when you hire a police officer for the first time, you can see below there that entry-level officer, there's 888 academy hours. That's just to teach them everything there is, from nuts to bolts on laws of arrest, DUI, how to drive, how to shoot. And on top of that, when they come out of the academy, they spend another 1,000 hours to learn how to operate here in our community and do things the Mountain View way. Once you're finished with that, there's mandatory training that's regulated by the California Peace Officer Standards and Training. We call that POST, that we have to do. So this would be domestic violence, cultural awareness, bias training, you name it, de-escalation. We have this very long list, and you see some of those up on the screen here of just mandatory training. And then between that, we also fit in, on top of that, extra training in certain areas. If you become a detective, you will go, and you can see on the right-hand column the types of classes that you'd need to go to receive an even higher level of training. So in many ways, you can see we put a lot of emphasis on this, and I think it's important because that translates into higher quality of service to the community. So that concludes our presentation here, and I will turn it back over to the chair for any questions.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the advisory board members to see if there are any questions or clarifications at this point. Cleve, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Chief, I just have a question about the weekend team. I noticed that you said that they work 12-hour shifts, and I was wondering if there's any way to not guys working 12 hours.
I'm sorry, you broke up just on the last part of that. Any way to not?
Have people working 12-hour shifts.
We're looking at that. Actually, we were looking into it pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic hit us because we had actually a staffing study too. It was going to kind of inform us on the best use of resources, and part two of that discussion was going to be, are we deploying resources on a shifts as the best way possible? And I think I know where you might be going with this in terms of that's a long time to work, right? For the fatigue factor.
Yeah, so in my industry, we work 12 hours and nobody likes it. And so I'm familiar with that and how they might feel at the end of a 12-hour shift, not even, and I don't even the mental, abuse that they get or the things that they see that we talked about, the MVPDX training that you might be exposed to in a day. And so I just, wonder 12 hours of that, how healthy is that for our officers, and is there any way to reduce that, that drain?
Right. And we've actually considered a lot of that. There's an interesting phenomenon that we saw, and when we instituted this shift about 10 years ago was we've actually seen, because of the cost of living in the area, we have a fair number of officers that live very far away, and we do have a sleeping quarters here in town. So those are kind of typically, in very general terms, the officers prefer that to work those shifts because they can then go home and spend 4 days with their families. But there's clearly pros and cons to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions, clarifications from board members? Okay, I had one quick question, Chief. Of the 144.5 FTEs, is that a fully staffed police department, or is that still not fully staffed? I wasn't sure because I had heard there might be some gaps in the headcount. I may not have that right.
Right. Yeah, that number is what we're budgeted for fully staffed. We're running about 8 officers short right now. It flexes because we have attrition through retirements, and then we have people in the academy coming in. So that number is constantly flexing throughout the year.
Okay. So if that budget doesn't get used towards salaries, does that get returned to the city or to a general pool, or what happens to that money?
Yeah, at the end of the fiscal year, it all goes back to the general fund. And I don't know if Audrey, if you want to give any additional granularity to that.
Sure. So when we budget, we have some allowance for vacancies because no organization can be so perfectly timed to be at 100% staffing all the time. And so that's in part accounted for when we build the budget. And then if we wind up at the end of a year with revenues above what we budgeted or expenses below what we budgeted, that becomes an operating balance that we use for one-time expenditures, like limited period positions, or to contribute to reserves, either the budget stabilization reserve or the capital improvement program reserve, but it doesn't sit in whatever budget it was originally budgeted to.
Thank you. Other questions from the board at this point? Cleve, your hand is still up, but I don't know if that's from before. Okay. All right. If there's no other questions right now from the board, I'm going to move to the public to see if there's any comments or questions there. And it looks like we have 2 folks with their hands raised. So Tim, please go ahead.
Hi, all. Thank you. I had one question about the self-insurance transfers part of the budget. Is that does that include the self-insurance for the insurance the police department has in case of officer wrongdoing, like Palo Alto just had to pay almost $200,000. Is that the self-insurance, or is that under the police department? I want to thank the vice chair for asking about the hours of working. I mean, I've worked 12-hour shifts before. It's tough, it's long, and it just from a labor rights perspective, I think it's a great question, great thing to be considering. And just sort of a little bit of a question about the numbers a little bit. 7 patrol teams of 4 to 6 officers is 24/7 coverage, which 6 times 7 is 42. Plus, that would be SORN officers for field operations. Looking at the breakdown, field operations is about twice as big as the special operations detectives. So add another 20 on top of that, that's 60. And then it says that we have 95 SORN officers. So including the stated need for 24/7 coverage plus the non-field team coverage gets us to around 60, which adding in a buffer, because you do want to be able to have some ability to deal with scheduling constraints and people retiring or trying to find new hires. Still, that gets us to maybe 70 or even 80 if we're being sort of generous, and there's 15 more on top of that. So in terms of whether things are fully staffed or understaffed, given some of the numbers that I'm seeing here, it looks like maybe even overstaffed could be sort of part of the thing.
Thank you. Bruce, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to veer away from what Tim was talking about entirely, because the numbers are not only dizzying, but it's just hard to get at things like philosophy of policing and all that in numbers like this. And so I'm sure that all or most of you are aware that there was a Vision Zero community meeting just before this one, and Scott Nelson was there on behalf of PD, which was great. And when I look at the pie charts, this was not news to me, but when I look at the pie charts and I see the amount of money that goes to public safety, I see much smaller slices going to things like public works and community development. And yet we have problems with potential death by infrastructure, and we don't want that to happen. The kind of things we need to do in our city beyond just public safety are really important. And so I do wonder about how we're allocating our money. We do need public safety coverage, absolutely. But is it at the right level? I can't tell by looking at these numbers. And that level of discussion I would find very useful. Also, the fire department's not in the room, and yet there's a big slice for them too. It's great to have PD represented in these meetings, but we don't have the fire department. And I think that's a problem that we don't have that. And then lastly, Sunnyvale is our other neighboring city. Now they have public safety combined in one department. So I can see how that can be difficult to split out in the same way that you did with Palo Alto. However, because they are a neighboring city, it would be good to have those numbers if that can possibly be at least estimated. I think that would be useful information once this goes to city council. The rest of it, I think, would probably be in the 600 pages of budget documentation. And Audrey, I'm not sure I'm going to be looking at that anytime soon, so I'll let that pass. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more quick check. It doesn't look like we have anyone else from the public with their hand raised, so I'm going to return the discussion to the board members to see if there's any other clarifications, questions, comments on this topic. Okay. I do have a couple of more questions. I'm going to ask the same question actually that I think it was Tim asked, which is the self-insurance and transfer budget. Does that cover the insurance in case there is some sort of settlement or anything that needs to happen from the police department? Or is that insurance in the police department budget?
It is not in the police department budget. The insurance that the city holds through policies or through self-insurance for all city operations is a separate fund called the Internal Service Fund. When I talked about the different funds and that section of the budget, and I'm looking at that right now, and it's not just liability insurance, and liability is not just related to the police department. It's, any part of the city's operations. There's also workers' compensation insurance and unemployment insurance and retiree health insurance, and equipment maintenance and replacement are also in that internal service fund.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
That was a good question.
Welcome. And
So,
may I offer another clarification also? And it was an oversight, thank you. In my presentation earlier, when I was talking about the different funds and how I gave one example around housing and the funding for affordable housing being in a separate fund outside of the general fund, I also could have noted at that time that the capital improvement program, the funding in our infrastructure, which is millions of dollars, is also a separate fund and not in the general fund.
thank you. Okay, then I had one more question. Mental health support for police officers and other police department staff. Where is that in the budget? Because it wasn't immediately clear to me where those types of services are housed.
The Human Resources Department has responsibility for benefits for all employees, including things through people's health plans, as well as something called an employee assistance program that provides mental health and other services for employees and their family members. We have a wellness program that's also operated out of our HR department. And I know that there are likely trainings, collaborations, and other things that you do within the police department that probably aren't really budget oriented, but more in just terms of, how you check in with each other and treat each other. But Chris, if there's anything that you want to add around that type of support for for officers.
Sure. Out of our police department budget, we have an app that it's called Cortico. It's created by a psychologist who deals a lot with police trauma. So that gives us very quick access 24/7 to a host of different networks. It's actually tied into our EAP services that Human Resources offers. We also contract with critical incident stress debriefing, most recent of which just earlier this week. Anyone who was involved in the really incredibly tragic accident with Andre is mandated to attend that because those incidents are just they have an effect on the first responders. So that was an opportunity to gather the paramedics, firefighter personnel, and police officers who have been working on that case and just really kind of process that and the loss as well.
Thank you for the clarification. I do want to say I wanted to inquire more about Bruce's question about Sunnyvale, but I didn't fully understand it. So Bruce, if you want to follow up with me, I can follow up with the right folks to get some clarification on that. Okay. Any other questions? I don't think I see any other hands up. Okay, so with that, we'll close this part of the agenda. So section 5, and we are moving to section 6, which is PSAB staff comments, questions, and reports. This item includes board and staff comments, questions, committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the PSAB at this time. Do any PSAB members or staff have comments or questions? Eva?
Thanks. I just wanted to pass on the information from Cal, who wanted somebody to mention the accident, the tragedy that occurred on last Thursday, because Andre was Cal's friend's stepson. And he said that Andre was an awesome and gentle lad. And he also wanted to say we need safe bike pedal lanes in areas of high vehicular traffic. And he also wanted to note that his funeral is on Monday with a viewing on Saturday, and may he rest in peace. So I just wanted to pass that on to the public and to the rest of you.
Thank you. Audrey?
I have a couple of quick announcements. I wanted to let the commission know that, believe it or not, we will be hitting the 1-year mark in a month. Actually in May, I think was the first meeting of the PSAB, and that means in April, you will have the opportunity to elect chair and vice chair positions. Those positions are set for a term of 1 year, and you may nominate yourselves, you may nominate someone else on the commission, and I wanted to give you a heads up about that, so you will have some time to think about it prior to the process that we will have on the agenda for the April meeting. I also wanted to let you know that the 2 subcommittees that you created at your February meeting are beginning their work. The mental health subcommittee, which I am supporting, will have its first meeting tomorrow. And Mike is supporting the police data subcommittee, and they've already begun to meet. And we expect that we'll be able to schedule updates for the April meeting on what's happening in both of those subcommittees. And then the last thing is I wanted to ask Mike, if you wouldn't mind, please, because I can't recall if we did announce the new school resource officer at the last meeting, but to do that if we didn't, or do it again if we did. And also just a very brief update, if you wouldn't mind, on the status of our work on the school resource officer procedure manual and MOU.
Absolutely. So I don't believe we brought up the selection at the last PSAB meeting. Just as a reminder, Acting Sergeant Lloyd Kearns was retiring and unfortunately leaving our school resource officer program and leaving some very big shoes to fill. We created as standard for these types of positions, an internal process. What was a little bit atypical was the manner in which we sought to find feedback and create a board to evaluate our applicants. In this case, the board consisted not only of internal people like Lloyd Kearns and our SRO Sergeant Scott Thomas, but also of, right before he left, our former principal management analyst, Melvin Gaines, as well as Mountain View High School ELD coordinator. So it was a broad range of people on that board. The board met and interviewed numerous applicants from the department and made a recommendation to the chief, which he supported. The recommendation and the announcement that I'm happy to share with you is that Officer Guillermo de Lira was selected as our next school resource officer, not replacing, but a successor to Lloyd and hopefully continuing on his legacy. Officer Guillermo, one of the things that was really impactful in this process, and to me specifically, was his sharing of the experiences that he had growing up on the east side of San Jose and the mentoring that school resource officers had in his life and the impact that it had, and how much he wanted to kind of pay that aspect of his adolescence forward, and the work that they had done to pay it forward as becoming a school resource officer. In fact, Guillermo came to Mountain View from Hayward, where he had been an officer for about 7 years. And this was one of his primary goals from the beginning of his career, was to become a school resource officer. So that's Officer Guillermo. So if you have a chance to meet him, whether it's at a school function, Dreams and Futures, something through PAL, by all means, please come up and introduce yourselves. It'd be nice for you guys to meet him and see him kind of in real life. Regarding the MOU and the procedural manual, there is a timeline that's been created for both of those processes with pretty clear check-ins, making sure that the respective community members are being engaged and dialogue is occurring, so we can create kind of drawing from the PSAB's work as well as the subcommittee's work and direction from City Council to put forth a kind of clear MOU to direct the relationship between the school resource officers and the districts, as well as very clear procedural manuals that will work in concert with the MOU. So although the timelines are some of which is out of our control, I'm optimistic that we can stick to the timelines that have been given. And I think it would be nice to see if we can get something before the next school year begins, but if not, it would be very soon, hopefully after. But saying that, there are some variables that are out of our control, but that is certainly the goal.
Thank you. Joan, I see your hand up.
Yes, I have two questions. One is on the election of officers for next year. And the question is, can an officer repeat? Can, for instance, can you as chairman do a second year, or is that either not permitted or not customary? And the second question I have is for Mike. Officer Guillermo, what is his last name?
Officer Guillermo de Lira. And, I think it probably, actually, Joan, thank you very much for asking me that. It reminds me that in taking in the input that we received from the community, although it was not the deciding factor, it certainly is important to note that Officer Guillermo is a Spanish-speaking bilingual officer as well.
Good. And it's De Lira, D-E-L-I-R-A.
Yes, capital D, capital L.
Yep, thank you.
I can answer that question through the chair, if that's all right.
That would be great.
I will double check the advisory body handbook, but I do not believe there's a prohibition on the officers repeating terms. I think that the general practice is to rotate that opportunity, but I don't believe it's prohibited, and I will confirm that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone on my screen? I don't see any hands up. So with that, we are adjourned at 8:36 p.m. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank